All right, everybody. I hope you all are enjoying the beginning of your lunch if you're eating right now. If not, I hope you're getting to your lunch soon. Today, again, like I said, we are, in our April session of the Transition Info Sessions for Parents. Today, we're going to be talking about colleges, universities, and other educational opportunities after high school for students with disabilities. So now that everyone's kind of getting settled, I think we're ready for takeoff. So, like I said, um, you know, y- make sure you take care of yourself during our session today, whether that means you gotta stretch or you gotta, eat, whatever you gotta do. You're in webinar mode, so you are, able to do almost whatever you want. So, in addition, our training is conducted in a safe zone. So feel free to share those thoughts and ideas openly without any fear of negative feedback. However, I do want to let you all know that today's session is being recorded and live streamed to our Facebook page. We do have a short amount of time together today, but we encourage you to drop any questions that you have along the way into that Q&A, and we'll answer those at the end. Now, because of it being recorded and live streamed, if you have any sensitive questions or questions with sensitive information in them, you can go ahead and drop those in the Q&A, as the Q&A is anonymous and will not be visible on the recording or Facebook Live. However, the chat will be. So definitely drop those questions in so that we can get to those at the end. But handle that sensitive information accordingly. All right, so let's dig in. My name is Eleni Bird. I'm going to be your pilot for this afternoon. And Mary Kate is going to be our co-pilot with Robin in the background helping with links. So, and we actually have some even more friends that are in the background ready to help in a variety of ways. So if you need anything, feel free to drop that in the chat and we will get you all set up. So, before we dig in, we want to know a little bit more about you. So, I'm going to actually pass this off to Anthony, and we're going to do a little check-in with our Mentimeter.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eleni. So yeah, my name's Anthony Chan. Worked for the ARC for many years now, and I try to help with collecting data, getting feedback. So for this presentation, we're actually going to go over to a website called menti.com. There's a couple ways to join, and basically we're going to try and gauge what your level of comfort is around this topic, higher education. And we also will later on revisit this survey to get a sense of what other topics are important to you, because we definitely value your feedback. We want to know what's important for you as a professional, a parent, or a family member, or an advocate. What other topics do you want to learn about? We've covered a lot in our series so far. We've covered everything from voc rehab to supports coordination, and now we're talking about higher ed. So if there's other topics that you think are super important, definitely let us know in this survey. So there's a couple ways to join. You can scan that QR code, or you could go to menti.com and the code to join will be 85229477. So go to menti.com or scan the QR code and type in that code 85229477, and we can just do a really quick survey here and answer a couple of questions. So I'm actually going to share the screen so you guys can see. And looks like we already got a few people joining. This is just kind of a icebreaker, question, just to kind of get you familiar with how to use our survey. We use a lot of sliding scales here. Now, I, by nature, am not a violent person, but you never know what life throws at you, so you need to be prepared, right? So we want to see, are you prepared to fight 100 duck-sized horses? Do you think you could take that many horses on, even if they are that tiny? And if you feel good, slide that slider all the way to the right. If you're not sure, maybe keep it in the middle. And if you really don't think you could take that many, because 100 is a lot, I think that's more intimidating than just one horse. Well, actually, I don't know, but that's all the way on the left. And then we got a follow-up question. How many horse-sized ducks do you think you could take on? Looks like, do you think you could take on one duck the size of a horse? Because that sounds pretty scary to me too. I don't think I could beat either of those. I just feel bad, right? Seeing that many tiny horses, that'd be really cute. I just want to play with them. I don't know why they're fighting me in the first place. Same thing with a giant duck. I mean, ducks are kind of mean, actually. They're pretty, not as bad as geese, but they can be mean. So maybe I'd run away from that. But yeah, definitely not something I want to see in the back alley in Harrisburg. Okay. So looks like most people were able to join and contribute. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So a little bit more serious now. Let us know, how knowledgeable do you feel about the range of college opportunities for a student with a disability? And then another question here, how confident do you feel about planning for inclusive college opportunities after high school? Uh, all anonymous, so please just be honest with us. We got a lot of information to cover, so we want to make sure we're doing a good job here, and we can get you the resources you guys need so you can start preparing for life after high school, because we know that's a scary question sometimes, right? So yeah. Okay, looks like we got a good number of responses here. So I'm actually going to keep this survey up, but I'm going to throw the Zoom screen back to Eleni, and we are going to go back to the PowerPoint here. So, Eleni, it's all yours.
All right. I don't know how I'm still thinking about these ducks and how what I would be up to taking on, but we can save that for another day. So I have one more logistics piece to share with you before we dig into our content. We have created a Padlet, which if you're not familiar, this is a great place to collect resources and share them. You'll find information from each of the presentations we've done in this series, whether the fall or the spring, and that includes recordings of those sessions, tons of helpful resources on each of those topics. So the section for today's session is called Higher Education. So I'm actually going to take you real quick to see that. Oh, or maybe not. Actually, you know what? If someone wants to pop that in the chat, then we should be ready to rock and roll. All right. So I'm actually going to show you what this looks like real quick. So when you go into this link, you're going to find all of these buckets, right? So we have some general resources, and oh, it's actually going to be called education. So if you click into this, this is going to be some of those resources we're going to share today, but you can also find all of these other buckets that we have covered throughout our time doing these sessions. So definitely take some time to explore that. But in the meantime, let's get to the good stuff. All right. Oops. It would help if it would let me get out of here. There we go. Okay. All right, so there is our Padlet. Again, you can use that QR code to access that, but let us dig in. All right, so today we're going to take some time to build up a basic understanding around the range of, post-secondary opportunities or college opportunities for students with disabilities across Pennsylvania. So we're going to focus a little bit on how to plan and prepare for that transition, and then we'll finish up by sharing a plethora of helpful resources, including the ones that we just saw in that Padlet. All right, so what is higher education, right? So higher education is also known as post-secondary education or further education or advanced education or undergraduate education or tertiary education. Oh my goodness, there are so many terms that describe this or collection of experiences, right? So all of these terms refer to any formal education pursued after high school, right? So we'll dig into what some of those options can be next, but these programs help individuals gain specialized knowledge, technical skills, and the credentials needed for careers and lifelong learning, right? So when we're talking about inclusive post-secondary education, we're referring to all of those higher education opportunities that are designed to support students with disabilities, including intellectual and developmental disabilities, in accessing college, university, and vocational training programs alongside their peers. So these programs prioritize equitable access, individualized supports, and meaningful participation across academic, social, and career related experiences. So some of those key features are that students should have access to academics, right? Through modifications, accommodations, and universal design for learning strategies to support a variety of diverse learners. Programs should also encourage social inclusion through opportunities for peer engagement, campus involvement, and community participation. Students in these programs should be exploring careers and preparing for employment through internships, job coaching, workforce readiness training, and a variety of other opportunities. And programs should also have a focus on self-advocacy, independent living, and decision making. All right, so once we, kind of know what all of these, no matter what they are, they should have, these included in some way. Let's take a closer look at what some of those different pathways can look like. All right, so these inclusive post-secondary education programs exist, at a lot of different places, including two-year colleges, four-year colleges, technical schools, community colleges, and a lot of other locations, but they offer pathways to those credentials and that lifelong learning. So when we're exploring inclusive post-secondary ed programs, it's important to understand that they can vary quite a bit in the level of support that they offer and the type of credential a student may earn throughout it. So some programs focus on a more supported degree completion, where students with disabilities take those traditional college courses alongside their peers. And they're working towards an associate's or a bachelor's degree or some other certificate credential that, includes those added supports like tutoring, executive functioning coaching, and some accommodations. And these programs are ideal for students who might be academically prepared for college, but need a little bit of that additional assistance to really succeed. There's also a lot of other programs that emphasize more career exploration and independent living skills and self-advocacy in a college setting. So these programs often lead to, a modified certificate rather than your more standard degree options. So students might take, some specialized courses in job skills, social development, and independent living, while also participating in internships or work-based learning or campus activities. And these programs help students gain confidence, they're developing those practical skills, and they're preparing for employment and community living. So the key difference is that degree-focused programs help students earn a traditional diploma or degree, while career and independent living programs prioritize skill building and workforce readiness in an inclusive college environment. So the right choice depends on the student's goals, strengths, and support needs. Some schools allow students working toward a modified certificate to still have access to audit those traditional courses, which is a nice blend of those two types of program pathways. All right, so no matter what type of program you end up choosing, you're going to notice some pretty significant differences from the high school experience. So let's dig into what that looks like. So like we said, a lot of things change when you transition from high school to college or any of those other settings. So let's dig into some of those differences in how a college's support services work for students with disabilities versus how the school system has worked for you up until this point. So first, while all colleges are required by law to provide accommodations under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, they're not required to offer the same level of support that students receive in high school under an IEP and IDEA legislation. So some colleges really go beyond the minimum requirements and they offer like really robust disability services, while others may only provide some basic accommodations like extended time on tests or note-taking assistance. And it's important for students and families to research what each school offers because there's going to be a lot of differences. Another major difference from high school is that shift in responsibility for self-advocacy. In high school, parents and teachers often take the lead in ensuring that students are receiving the accommodations they need, and that process is going smoothly, right? But in college, students must advocate for themselves. This means that they're responsible for requesting accommodations, meeting with disability services, and communicating with professors. Additionally, many universities will not communicate with parents about a student's academic progress unless the student gives explicit permission, right? This can be a huge adjustment for families who are really used to being involved in that educational decision-making process, right? So that can be a real change from the way we're used to things running in that school system. So another thing to be very aware of is some inclusive post-secondary education programs and specialized support services have age-specific requirements because they're often designed for those students in between age 18 and 24. Sometimes 26. It depends on each program. But these programs do provide structured supports for students who are transitioning to college, but it's more for that transition age. So if you're looking at this, when your student is already, 22 and has graduated, it's definitely it's going to be tough to make that happen that quickly. So we want to start looking at these early, which we'll talk about that a little bit more. But understanding these differences can really help students and families prepare for that successful transition from high school to college. We have to really put in that time to research the rules around support services and understanding those legal rights so that we can really pinpoint where we land in that huge range of supports offered by colleges. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about the actual process of receiving supports and services. So when accessing accommodations, it's required for students to register with the college's Disability Services Office. And this applies to pretty much across the board to colleges and universities. So um, you will sometimes hear it called different things. Sometimes it will be like the Office of Accessibility. Sometimes it'll be the Disability Services or the Disability Supports Office. This is another one that goes by a lot of different names. But that's going to be your most important stop while researching and visiting colleges. So instead of a case manager and an IEP team coordinating all those supports and supports and services for a student, like they would have during high school and earlier, a college students accommodations are coordinated through that disability supports and services office, right? So when we're discussing those accommodations with the disability support or services office at the school, you may notice really how much variation there is between these programs. So whether we're looking at that modified certificate, specializing in career exploration and self-advocacy, or the more supported traditional degree completion, you're likely to find some accommodations are fairly standard across most post-secondary settings. Things like extended time on exams, use of laptops or other technology for tests and exams, or even calculators can fall into that. Um, a lot of times it might just be permission to make audio recordings, especially in Pennsylvania, since it's a two-party consent state. A student isn't able to record those lectures without that explicit permission. Sometimes there are really cool smart pens. I actually had one of these as an accommodation after a brain injury in college, where as I wrote, it would record that section of the lecture. So when I would take my pen back and tap that, it would play the section of the lecture that was being spoken while I was taking that section of notes. So there's really cool technology out there that can help. Um, of course, we can always look at reducing that course load. However, sometimes financial aid might be, may be impacted as a result of that. So that's always something to be aware of. But also things like priority registration of courses. Anyone who's ever had to sign up for a college class knows sometimes they fill up quick. So that can be, something that is discussed as an accommodation. But also things like copies of notes from a classmate or even sometimes a scribe, someone who is going to do that note taking for you. But also access to audiobooks, voice recognition software, and speech to text or text to speech programs. So there are a lot of accommodations that are pretty common at that collegiate level. However, some accommodations might be a little bit more difficult to get. So they can be explored for students that are looking to fulfill that more traditional degree requirement, right? So things like extended time on papers and projects. So this might not typically be given on an ongoing basis, but rather as a situation arises, right? So this might be appropriate for students with like an acute medical or, psychological condition that is inhibiting in a more, like I said, acute way. Um, you know, Something that is, an option, it's becoming more of an option these days are things like course waivers and substitutions. So some colleges may choose to offer these, but they are not required to. And of course, alternate exam formats are something that can be a little bit harder to obtain, but things like an oral test or a spoken test rather than a written test. So colleges don't typically grant this type of accommodation. However, there's no hurt in asking, right? So these are sometimes more difficult, but could be possibilities. But there's also a lot of other services that may be available. So things like training and adaptive technology, even mentoring programs and tutoring programs that exist to all students on campus, right? Or those student support groups that exist either through the student life areas or a lot of other different pockets of college life. But also, some help with those study skills and time management may also be available. So there's a huge range of supports available to students with disabilities, whether or not they have goals to complete a degree or traditional degree during their program. But it's a big shift into adulthood either way. So we can do a lot now, right? While we're preparing for this transition. So let's talk a little bit more about what we can do. All right. So as students move into that post-secondary education and parents shift to a less direct role in the academic decision-making process, it becomes essential to prepare students by developing those key skills that will help them succeed independently, right? So like we've said before, one of the most important areas is self-advocacy. So students really need to understand their own needs and know what supports are available and feel confident asking for them. We can help these students prepare by like discussing accommodations with students and encouraging students to speak up during their IEP meetings, maybe even lead them, but really understanding their accommodations and how to access them. And this can even be like role-playing scenarios where they practice requesting that support from a professor or a disability services office. And that can be incredibly valuable. And let's say you're the one who's role-playing with them, explore those challenges. How are some ways that a professor may react that they can be prepared for? So a lot of those role-playing, it can be really fun too. So beyond self-advocacy, academic and life skills are critical for success, right? So students should practice, time management, organization, and problem solving, whether that's, keeping track of assignments, managing parts of a schedule, or handling responsibilities at home. So those, independent living skills like doing laundry, budgeting, using public transportation, they always, play a huge role in a smooth transition, right? Um, by there's I we're going to talk about this a little bit more next, but I think that this is another good time to really talk about ways to weave the things that already exist in that high school setting in as opportunities for students to really be in that inclusive environment and not necessarily have to create an inclusive environment. So we really want to let me give an example. So we're working with a student who has a sneaker shop, right? And it's an online store. He sells sneakers. He absolutely loves it. And part of his transition goals are, to really build that business, maybe have a brick and mortar one day, but to have this self-driven business. So we're looking at different, skill lists and things like that from, that are related to owning a business. Things like keeping track of a schedule, some of that technology fluency, a lot of those basic math skills, but also Introduction to Business is a course that his high school offers. So let's look into that and see how we can make that space more inclusive. So there's a lot of opportunities for things that are already, accessible to you that can just be intentionally planned to be a part of that. Um, so, by focusing all these skills now, parents and families can really have that bigger impact, right? So we're ensuring that, your student is confident, capable, and really ready for that next step in their journey. So in that Padlet, which we'll get back to in a little bit, it's full of tools to help build that time management, organization, independent living, and all of that. So definitely take some time to explore. All right, so like we said, high school is the perfect time for students with disabilities to explore their interests and develop new skills that can shape their future, create opportunities for exploration, and it really helps students discover their strengths and build confidence and gain valuable experience that support that transition into adulthood. So one way to do this is through electives, right? So courses like art, music, technology, like we said, business earlier, some of those career technical educations that technical education courses can really help students develop their interests in different areas. They can build that independence, those problem solving abilities. Some schools even offer like work-based learning programs or internships that give that hands-on experience in a variety of fields. Some colleges may even offer those pre-college experiences for high schoolers to be able to participate in and become familiar with. One of my favorites is extracurricular activities and clubs, right? They're a great way for students to connect with peers and explore their interests in a structured but supportive setting, right? Whether it's drama, robotics, student government, business leadership, or a gaming club, these opportunities really do provide social engagement and leadership development opportunities. So to go back to our example from before, we were looking into things like participating in the school store or the Future Business Leaders of America Club at the school. So a lot of these structures are already there within the school environment to be able to tap into to expand those opportunities. So even beyond school, there's different community opportunities like classes, like art workshops, coding boot camps, fitness programs, a lot of different things that really allow students to learn new skills in a real world environment. So public libraries, community centers, local organizations, they offer a lot of different classes that welcome diverse learners. And it might be even worth, looking into volunteering within those different areas that they're interested. So we might look at a mentorship opportunity between, this high school student and, another real retailer in the area so that we can get some of those networking pieces in motion. Um, so we really want to encourage students to explore electives, clubs, community programs, volunteer opportunities, all of those things that are going to set them up for success by helping them find their passions and develop those essential skills beyond the classroom. All right, so couple practical steps. So preparing for college is an exciting journey, right? And for students with disabilities, early planning and active involvement can make a huge difference. So before we dig into some of the resources and Pennsylvania-based programs, let's review some next steps, big ideas, and just moving forward kind of stuff. So first, we want to involve the student in every step of the planning process, right? Their voice should be at the center of decision making. It's their future, and learning to advocate for themselves now will help them in college and beyond. So the next part is, really starting that college planning early. We want to be researching programs, understanding accommodations, and preparing for independence because that takes time, right? So beginning really early in high school or even in middle school allows students to explore their options without feeling rushed. So it's important to keep, all of these options open and make sure that they get to explore. Because so much does change after high school. So to prepare for some of those big changes, we also want to make sure we're keeping documentation of that student's educational journey, any diagnostic paperwork, all of those records are up to date, because, colleges don't create IEPs. So students really have to provide current documentation to access accommodations. So keeping evaluations, medical records organized ensures a smoother transition. So, and finally, with that said, when you are looking into campuses, or different programs at different colleges, you want to make a point to physically visit the college campus and physically meet with disability services. So touring schools and speaking with staff gives students a sense of what support's available, and helps them practice those self-advocacy pieces before they even start college. Plus, you'll be able to assess the actual accessibility of the buildings and how inclusive or integrated the student population really is, right? Because we want to see what it looks like in practice. So now that we know some of those best first steps, let's take a look at some options here in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania offers many, many, many inclusive post-secondary education programs, and some of them are designed to support students with disabilities in achieving their academic and career goals. So the PIHEC, or the Pennsylvania Inclusive Higher Education Consortium, they provide a lot of authentic, inclusive post-secondary education opportunities for students with intellectual disabilities through their support and development of 5 model initiatives across 5 Pennsylvania universities. And they include Millersville, Duquesne, I think I said it right. Temple, Gwynedd Mercy, and Lock Haven. So this is a network, a consortium of schools that is really driving that establishment. However, we also have a huge, oh, thank you, Nicole. So in addition, we also have a great resource, thinkcollege.net, and they have a huge comprehensive list of programs available across the US with an interactive map that allows you to explore Pennsylvania programs and US programs according to different search criteria. So the directory of programs lists another like 15 colleges and universities across PA with a variety of programs, including Penn State, Drexel, East Stroudsburg, Westchester, Villanova, and multiple community colleges and more. So we won't have time to explore it today, but definitely take some time to look through those different resources, and you'll be able to really customize what those different search criteria are to find the programs that align with your students' goals, whether they're looking for traditional degree completion, 2-year school versus 4-year school. You're really able to dial in what options there are here in Pennsylvania. I think college has a lot to offer, but I also want to share some other sources of information, because Think College is just one of several hubs that you can learn about inclusive post-secondary education. So, like we said, Think College, definitely explore that. Another great resource is DREAM, the Disability Rights Education Activism and Mentoring Partnership through Messiah University. So DREAM supports students with disabilities in higher ed by providing mentorship and advocacy tools for students with ID across Pennsylvania. So great resource there. Students looking for information on navigating college with a disability can turn to NCCSD, or the National Center for College Students with Disabilities. Their website offers resources on accommodations, accessibility, and student rights, and more. Finally, AHEAD, or the Association on Higher Education and Disability, is a great resource for professionals and families. Their site includes information on policies, best practices, and disability services in college settings. So all of the organizations and resources that I've mentioned are linked through the Padlet. And like I said, definitely take some time to explore all they have to offer. Now, before we move to questions, which we're almost at the end, I know I've been yapping at you for a solid 30 minutes now, huh? We're going to actually, I want to show you that all of these resources are in that Padlet. So if you need a reminder, or if you need to get back in the Padlet, or if you lost the link, totally okay. This is here for that.